Good morning, everyone. We are admitting everyone into the session right now. We'd definitely love to thank everyone for joining us this morning for this session. And I see a few more participants joining right now. All right, so once again, thank you all for joining us on this wonderful Tuesday morning. Today, we are hosting our first TA session for San Joaquin and Stanislaus counties pertaining to CalAIM Links technical assistance and resources for community supports providers. My name is Alexis Taylor. I am a senior program manager here at HealthBegins, and I will be one of your facilitators for today's content. We would like to let everyone know that this session is being recorded, so you should have received a pop-up on your screen to let you know you can go ahead and click one of your options right there on that screen. All right, so before we dive into today's session, I would really like to set a really collaborative and bi-directional environment. So we'd love to invite everyone to click on their participant settings and use that three-dot menu to go ahead and update their Zoom name. Feel more than free to also include the name of your organization, your pronouns, anything that you want us to know about you as an individual and your organization. Like I said, we want to make sure that we are creating a really supportive ambiance for this session, and getting to know one another is a part of that process. Furthermore, we want to break the ice by inviting everyone to put 3 words in the chat that describe how you're feeling today. Are you excited to receive this content? Are you previously confused about some of the elements pertaining to CalAIM? Are you thrilled at being able to participate in this session? So on and so forth. And that is also for our co-facilitators today. Please feel more than free to share in the chat how you are feeling today. And then lastly, we want to make sure that everyone can ask as many questions as needed. So in addition to being able to use the function to raise your hand and ask a question at any time in this session, please also feel more than free to dive in and post a question in the chat. We'll have a number of project partners that will be monitoring the chat for us today, so that way we can make sure that we uplift those questions either while we're facilitating, if time permits, or during any of the 2 Q&As that we're going to have throughout this session. All right, so what will we be discussing today? I'll be going over today's objectives within the following slide to provide a breakdown of exactly what content is going to be covered within this session. Following that, we're going to share a program overview of exactly what CalAIM Links is, and what resources we are providing to CBOs that participate in these sessions. Everyone should have received a link to the Community Supports 201 supplement that also provided information on our project's background, the microsite link that we have that has resources and ways that you can register for upcoming sessions. And everyone should have also received a link to the information session as well that provides information or background on this project, but we'll also do a very brief overview of that today as well. After we conclude our program review, we'll discuss pathways to becoming a credentialed provider, because we have a number of CBOs that are not contracted in these regions, and we want to make sure that we are deconstructing that process and giving everyone a clear understanding of what it takes to move forward in the contracting process, and how you can partner with MCPs to provide Medi-Cal beneficiaries with expanded services. After we conclude those 2 sections, we'll have a brief Q&A to make sure that everyone can ask the questions that they have, and make sure that you have responses to any, learning gaps that you may have, after that information is shared. Finally, we'll close out with DHCS contracting requirements, and which will cover the 4 very key components of DHCS's requirements for community supports providers. We'll briefly touch base on ECM today as well, but today's session is specifically catered for community supports providers. After we conclude that, we'll have a final Q&A. All right, so as promised, today's objectives. As noted, our team's been working to develop a 3-part training series specific to the needs in San Joaquin and Stanislaus counties. This is going to be the first of 3 sessions. And these sessions have been designed with input from HealthNet and the Health Plan of San Joaquin to tailor the content based on what they've reviewed CBOs in your regions to have had as core needs and learning gaps. So we wanted to make sure that we aggregated and compiled that data and put it into a very streamlined session for you. The things that or the components that we're going to touch base on today that you can ask questions about and engage us on are going to concern key aspects of the community supports program, becoming a community support provider. As I mentioned earlier, what are those expectations? We'll discuss the process for becoming a provider, and we'll also touch base on CalAIM funding opportunities. All right, so as mentioned, I did want to conduct a very brief program overview. Awesome, I see more participants coming into the session. So CalAIM Links is a collaboration of HealthBegins, Aurrera Health Group, and Transform Health. Transform Health is going to be leading the sessions that take place in San Joaquin and Stanislaus and providing very in-depth content based on your feedback as to what your learning needs are, and in partnership with the plans that we're working with in those counties, HealthNet and Health Plan of San Joaquin. This project is made possible through amazing funding from the California Healthcare Foundation, who's invested a tremendous amount of knowledge and information sharing for us to bring this project to life and make sure that we're responding to the needs that CBOs have within the context of CalAIM. Carlina Hansen is our senior program officer that is funding this work, and her specific role is to improve access to coverage for Californians that have low income. So once again, going back to the entire, high level goal of CalAIM is to make sure that we are, providing those most marginalized communities with expanded access to services. And we want to make sure that we're partnering together with CHCF to realize the promises of CalAIM. So to provide some background on this work, at a high level, everyone understands that one of the goals of CalAIM is to provide more equitable and coordinated services. One of CalAIM's goals is to improve quality outcomes and to reduce health disparities among Medi-Cal beneficiaries, just as I just outlined. This provides an amazing opportunity for CBOs and MCPs to work together to realize that promise. And so we realize that although this promise is, right here in front of us, right here within reach, we realize that smaller CBOs, particularly those that are BIPIC-led or serving, or those that employ a community-based workforce, they're going to encounter challenges when they're seeking out those contracts with plans. And that's because they don't have the existing relationships with the plans. This can be a result of landscape infrastructure that wasn't previously set up to advance that partnership development. And we understand that a strong equity-oriented partnership between a CBO and between plans is going to be critical to the success of CalAIM. But how do we get there? How do we make sure that we're fostering those relationships? How do we serve as a conduit to get very important information from DHCS through the plans down to the CBOs? And that's where this program comes into play. In 2021, CHCF funded HealthBegins to design an intervention to advance those relationships. And to provide you with some background on how that intervention went in 2021, we were able to host 9 technical assistance sessions that focused on improving CBO contracting readiness and advancing relationships with CBOs and MCPs. 2 of those sessions were statewide sessions, and the remaining sessions were hosted in San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Shasta, and Sonoma counties. We worked with 3 health plans to execute that work, and they made sure to inform us of what the plan-specific requirements were and what DHCS specific requirements were. And the plans that we worked with included Partnership Health Plan, HealthNet, and the Health Plan of San Joaquin. And during the last phase of work, it was incredibly successful. We had 769 participants throughout the state of California that participated in that work. And throughout this session, I'll make sure to drop links to this information and to the slide deck in the chat directly after we conclude this program overview section. And so we move on to, what we learned from that work and how that is informing our goals. One of the things that we took away was that, there was a vast disparity between where CBOs were in their contracting readiness, where there were some CBOs that were, just getting introduced to CalAIM, not understanding the contracting process. And while there were other CBOs that were, engaging with MCPs, but still needed help like facilitating that process. And so for this specific program, we have three overarching goals. Number one is going to be for us to recruit CBOs that are led by and serve people from communities that have been historically marginalized. We'll focus on identifying needs, building up your knowledge bases, and elevating the barriers that you're experiencing. So that way we can move the needle on these CBOs becoming community supports providers. Number two, we want to make sure that we are building impactful relationships by facilitating these local learning and networking sessions. The plans are present on this call today, so that way you can uplift the questions that you have and have the individuals that would be able to respond to those questions right here in this space. So that way we can facilitate that, building those relationships. And so finally, we seek to strengthen statewide capacity. As I just outlined, one of the promises of CalAIM is to make sure that we are supporting, Medi-Cal's, beneficiaries that are in the absolute most need. And so we want to make sure that we're strengthening statewide capacity among CBOs because they are the ones that render those very critical and important services. All right, so regarding our project approach for the 2021 implementation of this work, we are hosting statewide sessions that will provide very foundational information, but we're going to host county-specific sessions such as the one you're participating in today. And we're going to host these sessions in Shasta, Trinity, Stanislaus, San Joaquin, Fresno, Kings, and Tulare counties. We're going to work closely with the MCPs that we outlined previously, but we're also working with Anthem and Partnership Health, in those counties that we've identified as well. Once again, HealthNet and Health Plan of San Joaquin are on this call today, so you will be able to ask any questions that you need support with regarding the CalAIM contracting process. As noted, these specific sessions that are county specific are advanced. So we have sent out a Community Supports 201 session along with the links to the statewide foundational session that we hosted in May to make sure that you just have that preliminary prerequisite information before joining the session to make sure that we are on a very level playing field and that all of the CBOs have the support and background information they need to process this information and be very successful in moving towards executing upon the information that's presented today. Finally, we have intentionally made sure that these sessions will take place in a very small, intimate setting. We've only invited a number of CBOs because we hoped to secure 8 to 10 CBOs per region because we wanted to make sure we were creating an ideal environment for learning and just really fostering that bidirectional communication. So going back to what I mentioned previously, you do have access to the chat to ask those questions. We have 2 Q&As, and you can, of course, feel more than free to raise your hand so that way we can address any questions or learning needs that you may address. All right, so before we get to our first modules for today, I wanted to provide you with some resources, a few assumptions about our audience today, and then for us to dive into just 2 brief polls before we dive into our content. So we have a website, which is going to be located at healthbegins.org/CalAIM. This resource is critically important. In addition to providing, very specific background about this project, you're going to see the links that you need for upcoming events that you can register for, in addition to the session archive. This session archive is incredibly important because it includes the recordings for all of the prior sessions that have very tangible information that your organization can take back, to the contracting process, review that curriculum, review those notes, review the questions that were asked, and just receive that on-the-spot information that you need. In addition, we're going to have a project updates tab that's also going to include CalAIM specific updates, statewide, links to other TA sessions that you may need that the plans themselves are hosting, because that information will be distinct from what we're offering, in addition to having access to all of the slide decks that we're going to have for these sessions. Once again, I just want to re-emphasize how important it is for all of our participants to understand that we're here for the CBOs. We're working very closely with the plans to make sure that you have all of the resources that you need. And we wanted to make sure we had all of that information in one location so you could have, just on the spot access to what you need to be successful. And so a few assumptions that we have about our audience today. Number one, Our assumption is that you are a California-based nonprofit organization that is based in San Joaquin or Stanislaus. Number two, you have an interest in becoming a contracted community supports provider with either the health plan of San Joaquin or HealthNet or both. Or you could possibly be an intermediary or a conduit that is looking to subcontract with one of the participants that is on the call today, or you already have an existing relationship with those plans and are willing to uplift best practices to foster CBOs on the path to contracting readiness. Number three, you have a good level understanding of what CalAIM is. As noted, we were able to send out that Community Supports 201 supplement. We were able to send out that statewide foundational session. So that way, if you have, a lower level of understanding with regards to CalAIM and community supports, we can get you, up to speed to make sure that we have a very level playing field in this session. And then lastly, you have completed the CBO Readiness Assessment that was sent out by our project team. I do want to emphasize that this CBO Readiness Assessment is incredibly important. As noted in the invitational emails that everyone received, we have been working with the plans to develop this content. However, the CBO Readiness Assessment is what uplifts the voice of the CBOs in designing this content. So quite literally, what we hear from you would get embedded into this curriculum. So that way we know, hey, this is what the CBOs have requested. These are what the learning needs are. Okay, we want to work with the plans to make sure that this content is tailored specifically to their needs. So those are the assumptions that we have about today's audience. And if for any reason you have not completed that CBO readiness assessment, it is not too late. As mentioned, we are going to have 3 sessions, of which this is just the first. So feel more than free to dive into your email to click on that assessment and complete it. We'll also include that link to that assessment in the chat. That being said, we do want to host 2 brief polls before we dive into today's content. You're going to see the poll hop up on your screen. And the first question is, how far along are you in the CalAIM Community Supports contracting process with an MCP? As noted earlier, some of the CBOs are already contracted while others are not. Some might, have one contract and want to pursue another. And so I will go ahead and launch this poll on the screen, and everyone will have 30 seconds to go ahead and provide us with some feedback. All right, thank you so much. And I am seeing that we have exactly what we expected. We have a very mixed audience today. So we have some providers that are not contracted with an MCP. We have some that are in negotiations. So they might have questions regarding, the progression of that, how to negotiate with MCPs. We have some that are already contracted with one. We have some that are already contracted, but also pursuing additional contracts. That is wonderful. And that's very reflective of what we've seen in other counties as well, that we have a mixed audience of participants. All right. And so moving on to our next poll, this question is, please review the list of historically marginalized populations or underserved communities that are on your screen when that poll pops up. Which of those populations represents at least 20% of the individuals your organization served in 2021? As noted previously, we do have a very strong equity focus. And so we'd love to know what the participant makeup, of those patient populations consist of for this specific session. And so let me go ahead and launch that poll for you right now. And once again, you'll have 30 seconds to go ahead and provide feedback. All right, so let's go ahead and end this poll. All right, so very reflective of what we've seen in prior sessions as well. Definitely another mixed audience that has a service provisions that range a number of communities. All right, perfect. This is wonderful to see that we have various patient populations that are being served. And so with that being said, I am going to pass it over to our partners at Transform Health, who are going to discuss pathways to becoming a provider.
Hi, thanks, Alexis. My name is Gretchen Schroeder, and I work with Transform Health, and I'm very excited to be here with you guys. I am going to make one request. I would love to have this be a conversation that we have today around becoming a community supports provider. And if you are able to, I'd love to have you turn your camera on so we can start to engage a little bit more with each other and hopefully have more of a conversation. So I would really appreciate that if you're able to do so. I'll go to the next slide, Alexis. So as we go through a lot of these slides today, we're going to talk about what the state is requiring for all of our community supports providers, but your health plans that you're contracting with will have their own set of requirements as well. So if you do have questions that are specific to the health plans, you'll need to contact them directly. And here are some of their contact. And of course, we'll come back to this and you'll have it in your slide deck, but it's important to understand that they will have their own set of requirements you'll need to work with. All right, let's go to the next slide. So I know all of you received the supplemental slide deck that was sent out with reminders for this presentation, and I'm sure you all read them, but you may not have digested all of them. So I wanted to just take a moment here to go over some of the basics so that we're all on the same page before we jump into our more detailed training. So one of the things I want to make sure that we're all understanding is what are community supports? What is this new service that we're able to now provide to our beneficiaries through Medi-Cal? So the key thing to understand is that community supports are medically appropriate, cost-effective services. And medically appropriate is going to be underscored here because we have to make sure this will meet an individual's medical needs as well as help with their social determinants of health needs as well. They are not Medi-Cal benefits, so community supports are optional for both the managed care plan to offer as well as for the member to accept. So optional is key here as well. California did test out the idea of community supports and will this work? Will this help improve outcomes for folks? Will this help us save money? And they did this through the whole person care pilots, which I know some of you in San Joaquin may have been part of, and the Health Homes program. So we took these learnings, these test cases here, and now we're building on those with the community supports program through CalAIM. What's really exciting from our point of view is that the state is encouraging managed care plans to really contract with community-based organizations for community supports. That's because you guys have the expertise of how to do these services and you know your community. So we really want to make sure that as you come into this program, you're also able to be successful in providing community supports with the managed care plans and the state's requirements. Let's jump to the next slide. So providers, what are you expected to do? This is really important. We want you in the program, the managed care plans want you in the program, the state wants you to be community supports providers, but we know it's a shift in how things have been done before. So we want to take some time to really work with you and help you do this and do it well. So the first thing is you'll have to do a contract with a managed care plan, which many of you may not have done before, and that's a whole different process than many other contracts. So we'll talk through some of those expectations. You are asked to deliver community support services, which you may be doing and you have expertise in, but we may need to tweak some things to make sure that you're complying with community supports requirements. So we'll talk through some of those service delivery criteria. And then of course, it's always going to be, reporting, contracting, billing requirements. They're going to be really important to understand as well. So we'll cover that today as well as in our next session. Any questions on these two pretty basic slides here today? Or if you have questions on the other slides that were in the supplemental presentation, please ask away. All right, let's go to the next slide then. Quiet group here. So as you look at contracting, there are two primary models that are being used for community supports, and I'm going to be asking you all which one is common in your two counties. Option number one is having the CBO do a direct contract with the managed care plan. So that's what we're seeing primarily with groups around the state. The other option, and I'm really curious if you guys are doing this or not, or thinking about it, is having a contracting entity, often called a hub. It could be the county, it could be a provider, who is contracting with the managed care plan directly, but then subcontracting out with CBOs for community support. Let's go to the next slide. So if you're doing model number one for contracting, you'll have that direct contract with the managed care plan, and you'll be responsible for meeting all of the requirements in that contract, which is, can you meet the service delivery criteria? Do you have capacity to serve all the folks the managed care plans would like to send your way? Do you have data sharing infrastructure? Are you able to report out and bill? So all those things are really important. And you'll be responsible for doing that if you have that direct contract. Next slide, there we go. And then the other option would be having this hub or intermediary that's going to be doing the direct contract with the managed care plan and then subcontracting out with different CBOs. And so the service delivery criteria would still be the same for this type of contracting, but it may be different for the administrative functions. Is anybody here doing this or thinking about doing this for community support? So I assume that silence means that no, we're all doing direct contracting. All right, we'll go with that. So anyways, I'd love to hear more about this as you guys get into this and see what is working for you, what your needs are. And I am curious if we start to have some more hubs come on board. All right, next slide. So as you look at becoming a community supports provider, and those of you who already have, I'd love to hear your experience. There is a certification process you must go through. And again, each health plan will have their own process that they're going to use. So it's really important to understand what those processes are. And so HealthNet has given us some slides, and I don't know if there's anybody from HealthNet who has joined us yet to talk to what their process is, but they've laid it out pretty well here, and they have links in the slides here, so we can make sure that you get this. But you have to obtain an NPI, which is a national, let's see if I can get this correct here, National Provider Identification Number, and that's what everybody has to do. So it's a pretty standard one, no matter who you contract with. HealthNet is requiring a letter of interest that you can submit through their website if you want to become a community supports provider. And then once those two things are done, then they move forward in doing the credentialing process and reviewing a lot of great pieces of paper, your W-9s, your insurance, all those good things. Next slide, please. Anyways, this is just some more information on their certification tools and instructions for how to do this. So I'll let you guys read through this on your own time. And I'm going to underscore one thing here, and this is number 5, which we've highlighted for you. Once you go through this process, it's really important that you can show the managed care plan, show the state that you can meet all the state requirements for contracting. They may be a little bit different than what you currently have in your existing contract, so it's going to be important to really think through how to incorporate these requirements into your policies and procedures. Next slide, please. Let's see, Cynthia, are you on yet in the health plan of San Joaquin? I don't see her. She wants to talk you through their process, but we'll come back to that maybe when she joins. And we'll just jump into a Q&A right now. Anybody have any questions on the slides we've covered so far? All right. Well, we do have one more poll before we jump into discussing how to become a community supports provider. So let's go ahead and jump over to that poll. So we'd like to find out so we can help tailor our conversation today to what your needs are, is what types of community support services does your CBO have experience providing? We'd love to know all of the different types of services that you have experience providing. So thank you for launching that poll. We'll give you 30 seconds to fill that out. No sound effects for this one, Alexis. Oh, there we go. There we go. We have some nice music. All right.
I'm so sorry about that, Gretchen. I just realized I was still.
That's okay. No, I was
missing grace
that.
everyone with all of that wonderful music. And so let me go ahead and end this poll right now and share the results.
Okay, great. This is so fun to see. So we have organizations who are doing housing services, transition navigation, and deposits. Folks doing asthma remediation, short-term post-hospitalization housing, recuperative care. Okay, great. This is really, really helpful. Wonderful. All right, well, thank you guys. This is great to know where you are and what services you have expertise in providing. You know how to do all these services. You're the experts. We just need to make sure that we can pair you up with the managed care plans to get this rolling in a successful way. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So this is my favorite reading. I hope all of you have checked this out. These are the state standard terms and conditions, STCs we call them, and they're really important. They do lay out what the requirements are from the state's perspective for doing community support. And so managed care plans have to put these requirements into their contracts, and they can also add to them. So just be aware that the STCs, great reading. I recommend about 15-minute chunks of time so you don't fall asleep, but the managed care plans can then build on them. So it's good to look at both the state as well as the contracts you get from each managed care plan to fully understand what the requirements are. There are 4 main areas we're going to talk through today from the STCs: service delivery criteria, quality and oversight, data sharing, and then payment. And we'll dig into payment a bit more in the next session, but I do want to cover some key parts of it. So if you're thinking about becoming a provider, you can start to think about how the payment terms that are set up will impact everybody. Okay, great. Let's go to the next slide, please. We're going to start with service delivery criteria. You guys are experts. You know how to provide these services. However, we do have requirements from the state and from the managed care plans that may make you need to tweak some of your policies and procedures, for example, or how you approach doing business to make sure that we're compliant with all of these regulations. So I'm going to talk through a few of those, and then those of you who are already contracted providers, I would love to hear what your experience has been around doing this. So I'm hoping that folks will speak up here. So the first issue is around service definitions. And so we do have very specific service definitions for each community support service. And it's going to be really important for you to understand what those are. And I'm going to use housing as an example. If you're a housing provider, you may do all sorts of housing services, but we have to make sure that as you look at the community supports housing services, that you can differentiate what is housing navigation and what is tenancy support. What does that look like? What's the difference? How is housing deposits different? So I want to make sure that you're aware of what those distinctions are. And so as you go through these and look at that in the STCs, how do you need to update your policies and procedures? What changes need to be made to your organization, your staff training, your onboarding to capture what the DHCS service requirements are? Has anybody done that here who's on board? Anybody want to share their experience of how they've had to look at their policies and procedures to see how they need to be changed and updated to match the DHCS requirements? You guys are a very quiet group here. All right, I'm going to keep trying, so I'm going to keep asking. So let's talk about staffing. So we do have staffing requirements, and again, we have what the state expects, and then your managed care plan may also have specific requirements around staffing ratios. So it's important to understand what is required and how would that necessarily change your staffing model currently, because some of these models of payment, some of these ways of doing business are just slightly different, and you may need to re-examine your staffing model. Again, anybody want to speak to this? I'm going to keep trying, see if we can get folks to share. All right, we'll keep moving on. So let's go to data management here, or data sharing rather. So as you probably have learned or you've heard about if you're new to being a medical health provider or working in healthcare, there's a whole different set of laws that govern what we call protected health information, PHI for short. And it's really important that you understand what those rules are and how it's going to impact the work that you do in community support. Now, as you start to contract with the managed care plans, you will be trained on what's called HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Did I get that right? And so you'll be trained on that, but it will take some time for you to understand what that means and how it impacts your current data systems in place. Who in your organization can see data? How is it shared? How is it collected and then stored and reported out? So all of those things are important to understand as you jump into community support. Any questions on these? All right, let's keep going. So more service delivery criteria from the STC. So referrals are a big deal in community supports. And if you are not already a community supports provider, it's going to be important that you have a member who has been referred to you for community support services and that the health plan has authorized to receive those services. And so understanding what does that process look like with each managed care plan may differ between the two plans here. And how does that impact your model for care? Okay. So it's gonna be really good to talk to other folks who maybe are already doing community supports in your county or in your network to understand what they have done. How does this work for them? Any questions on that? All right, let's go to outreach. Let's go back to the previous slide, please. Perfect. All right, so in addition to making referrals, you will also be given folks to do outreach to for community supports from the managed care plans. And there's a lot of great guidance around what outreach looks like, when you should be doing it. I mean, we have all those links in our appendix here. So I encourage you all to look into that and to really understand what that means and the timing of all of that, because sometimes we get, requests to reach out to a member and you've got to do it within 24 hours, making sure you have staff that can do that. So that'll be really important. All right, responsiveness, which you guys are not doing so well on today. So I'm going to see if we can get some more folks to respond here. But in terms of community supports, we want to get folks to be responsive to incoming referrals and to do outreach for members. And so one of the requirements is that you need to have a line that is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So how do you make that happen? Okay, do you have a system already in place to do that? Or do you need to create a new one? Do you have a voicemail that can accept messages 24 hours a day? Who checks those? How often? So all that's going to be really important to do that. Any questions?
Hi,
all
Grace.
right, let's go to the next slide.
From HealthBegins. Yeah, I was just wondering if we could, kind of pause and see. I know a few folks, answered earlier in the chat that they were like interested and curious about this content. I just want to kind of maybe call folks by name and see if we're hitting the right topics and the tone. Would that be all right?
That'd be great. Thank you, Sadhana.
Okay, yeah. So maybe I'll ask Fernando, because I was really thrilled to see that you were eager and excited and curious, and just wanted to see, Fernando, if you were able to unmute and let us know if these criteria are something that you had heard about so far, if this was familiar to you, if it's kind of hitting the right spot in terms of your learning journey.
So I'm actually sitting in for the other representative that is usually more in tune to what's going on. So I was eager to find out more about what all this is about, since I've been hearing about it, but nothing specific. I'm more kind of like representing the agency today. So I'm just here to gather that information and pass it on.
That's wonderful. What agency are you with?
I'm with Sierra Vista Child and Family Services in Stanislaus County.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us, and just kind of wondering, even in your position as you're kind of going to pass it along, is this what you were hoping to hear from us about today?
I find it very informative because, again, this is new to me, so just understanding the process and seeing how it's all going to entail. Yes.
That's great. Thanks so much, Fernando. I'm wondering if maybe we could get one more person, maybe Graciela from the Central California Asthma Collaborative. Maybe I could ask you to kind of do the same. Are these service delivery criteria kind of hitting the right the right spot in your knowledge.
Yes, and so for us, we're already contracted with various MCPs, and this is what we're seeing across the board as far as what we're expected to do as a provider, a contracted provider.
Oh, that's great. And so are you contracted for community supports or through other initiatives?
Through community supports for asthma remediation.
That's great. And I know some folks had answered earlier that they were earlier in the journey. I'm just kind of wondering, are there any kind of best practices or tips that you would share with folks that might be earlier in the journey, since you sound to be experienced?
Yeah, I mean, really lean on the health plans for guidance. It's, I think the application itself for contracting can be intimidating. It can be very lengthy. But you'd be surprised how many of the questions you're actually already doing. And so just being able to lean in on them and ask them if this is appropriate. And just because you don't have or you can't fully answer a certain section does not mean that you're disqualified from it. I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to these contracts. It can be lengthy, but it's possible.
Love that.
I like that point. Yeah, I think it's really important that if you do have questions, to reach out to the health plans and work with them on how best to answer it. I like that point a lot. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that as well, and that we've heard that across the counties as well, that it's just super important to be able to communicate with the plans, and that they're really looking forward to helping in the ways that you're talking about, like when folks are applying for community supports and they don't know the answer to something or think there's a gap. It just sounds like the plans are really being helpful in terms of crossing that bridge. So appreciate that insight. So I'll turn it back to you, Gretchen. I don't know if you want to keep asking folks around or if you want to move along with the content.
I may save it for a few others. I'd love to hear experiences as we go through some of the other core requirements and find out how folks have approached some of those issues too. So I appreciate those of you who have shared. Thank you. All right, let's jump to the next slide, Alexis, please. So again, the STCs have a lot of great language around service delivery criteria, and a lot of it will be helpful as you go about doing the contracting work. And so I want to make sure that you're checking in on the coordinations expected with not only the managed care plan, but also other providers in community, with ECM providers and other folks who are doing this community supports work. That's going to be really important to build those networks and figure out ways you can communicate and coordinate care for individuals. There's some great language around cultural competency, so being aware of what that is and how to incorporate that into your contracts and into your policies and procedures will be good as well. One of the things I want to point out is that we do have some language in the STCs around transition planning. And so if you have an individual who is receiving community supports from your organization, and they are transitioning either because they are changing managed care plans, they're moving, they've reached their goals that you've set out for community supports, we do expect that there's going to be some transition planning going on. So understanding what that means for your organization, how do you incorporate that into your model of care is going to be really good to understand. Any questions on these last points here for the service delivery criteria? Okay, let's keep going. So our next section, we're going to focus on quality and oversight. And again, I want to emphasize, especially with this piece here, is that the state has laid out some guidelines and expectations. However, we are seeing a huge variety in terms of what managed care plans are choosing to do for quality and oversight. So just be really aware that you need to work with each individual health plan to understand what their expectations are. And where they're coming from for this piece in particular. Next slide, please. So a lot of this is going to be tying to how does the MCP conduct oversight? And a lot of them are asking for certain reports on who are you serving, what are their needs, all that good stuff. So understanding exactly what data points is going to be needed by the managed care plan so you can collect those and report back out appropriately, that's going to be key to doing a lot of this. Other things are going to be making sure that you've updated your policies and procedures, that you have the right language for DHCS incorporated into your way of doing business. So I think it's just important to understand what it is from the state level, and then make sure you talk with your managed care plan. What are they looking for? What data points are they going to focus on? Is there anybody who's currently a provider? I don't want to focus on you, Graciela, but maybe you can talk to this, but of what you're seeing with this type of oversight and what some of the reporting requirements are for the managed care plans?
You know, as far as oversight, I think the scheduling a monthly or a quarterly meeting has been very helpful for us. You know, just an opportunity for the MCPs to go ahead and follow up, see if there's any challenges, any updates. I know, you know, for us with asthma remediation, there's been a lot of updates from DHCS as far as our process goes. So just having the ability to communicate a little bit more frequently has been helping us. And obviously everyone is available to us through email. So we haven't had many challenges there. But as far as, you know, reporting goes, I think we're doing our first reporting over to the MCPs, and, you know, they've been outlining everything for us, what information they require from us. So there's really no guessing on that. And, you know, haven't really had any complaints. I think we're all trying to figure out this new initiative and just really trying to do our best, especially as we move forward.
I really like that. I do think that this is a new initiative, and it's new to have our CBOs and MCPs work together, and we're all learning together how to make this work and how to be successful. So I really like that point, and I like the communication you've set up with your MCPs to really touch base and get the updates and talk through what's required, so there is no guessing game. I think that's a really great piece of advice.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to share anything about quality and oversight and what they're experiencing as they go through this process? Okay, well, we will move on. So our next area we're going to talk about is our data sharing. And this is a pretty broad term, and I think there's a lot to unpack here. One of the key pieces of community supports and CalAIM is where that we're collaborating with other partners to really address the needs of the whole person. And so it's important that we figure out, how does that work in our community? How does that work within our provider network to really do this? Next slide, please. So you will get some information from the managed care plan for the folks that you have gotten referrals for community support. So it's going to be important to understand what is coming in from the managed care plan, what you need to collect and update, and then what you need to report out. So just understand that flow of data and how your organization can handle it is going to be key to being successful here. We also know that the billing, the claiming that you guys will be doing to be paid for community support services is going to be tied to a lot of this data. So figuring out, what do we need to collect? How do we collect it safely? And then how do we put it back out for administrative purposes, for billing, for claiming, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. I know a lot of the CBOs that I've worked with throughout the state do not have a lot of great data systems. So they've had to think about, how do we do this? How do we set up new systems? How do we do this cost effectively? So I think it's going to be good to talk to other folks in your network to understand what they're doing, what have they found that's been successful, and talk to your managed care plan. What are their expectations? Are they willing to help you, like, start out doing Excel spreadsheets and build up to more sophisticated systems? But what are they willing to work with you on? Any questions on this? All right, let's go on. So the last piece here is around payment for community support services. And I think this is a really big topic. And I know it's been a struggle for many organizations around the state and for a lot of MCPs. So there's a lot to unpack here. I do just want to touch the surface here though, and just kind of talk through what are the core requirements, what are the SPCs outlined. So that as you think about becoming a community supports provider, you can be aware of what payment timelines are, what does this mean for you, can your organization work within these guidelines. So next slide, please. So one of the big things that we as we work with CBOs have really heard is that there's a lot of expectations, rightfully so, from the state to the managed care plans that they want to have claims submitted with these great code sets that have been defined by the state and using national standards. And that sounds great. I think it's really important. However, not all of our CBOs are able to claim or submit data to the managed care plans meeting those standards. And so thinking about how do we collect what we call the minimum necessary data elements that we can use for claiming, for billing, for reporting. So understanding what those are and how your organization collects them is going to be really important. Next slide, thank you. The other thing I want to emphasize around payment, and this is really important for CBOs who maybe have been doing services based on grants, is that you need to have authorization to provide a community support service from the managed care plan. So just if you get a referral from another provider, from a member, you need to have authorization before you can start providing that service and billing for it. And each managed care plan will have their own system to provide that authorization. Anybody want to share anything around that? Okay. And then the thing about payment is that payment is, the state language is that the managed care plan shall pay 90% of all seen claims and invoices within 30 days. And I want to underscore here that it has to be clean claims and invoices. So that's important. That's tied back to data. What do we need to report out? How do we collect it? How do we ensure it makes sense? So all of that is important to get paid for these community support services. So understanding that, and then the time frame work for your organization. Any questions around? All right. So payments. How much do you get paid for each community support service? What does that look like? Who decides? So this is a really big question, and it varies around the state. The state did put out some pricing guidance to the managed care plans that talks about some of the price points they think are appropriate for each community support service. But of course, each managed care plan is going to choose what model works best for them and the community they're working in. I do want to remind everyone that these community support services are not Medi-Cal benefits. So the managed care plans are not receiving additional funding to offer these community support. So we're all trying to work within the current payment model here. I'm going to skip to the next slide, and that's going to be more informative. Wonderful. So there's different payment models that we're using in community supports. And I find that a lot of CBOs who have not worked with managed care plans before may have a hard time adjusting to these new payment models. So I want to talk to them a little bit. I think they're being used for different community supports. So it'll be good to hear what your experience has been with them. The first payment model is what we call bundled payment. It's a per member per month, or a PMPM payment. And that means that if you have been authorized to serve 10 folks for housing navigation services, you're paid a flat fee for those 10 folks for the month of July, for example. So regardless of how many times you touch that person or provide services to them, you're still paid a flat fee. So thinking about how that impacts your staffing model, how it impacts the way you do business will be really important. Another model of payment is fee for service. And this can be based on a unit of service. It could be based on the meal if you're providing medically tailored meals. It could be based on per diem per 15-minute increments. And health plans do different models here. But it's trying to say we need to capture how much you're doing whatever length of time it is or how many meals you're providing, and we'll pay you for that. So if you do have a contract that has a fee-for-service model, you need to understand, how do I collect the data necessary to prove that I did the service in these increments of time or meals or daily benefits. The last model we're seeing around the state is a cost-based reimbursement. We're primarily seeing this for our housing deposit work. And so that's saying that if the health plan authorizes folks to provide up to $5,000, for example, for housing deposits, you have to figure out, when are they going to pay you for it? Is it a one-time only payment? Is it a monthly payment? So working with your health plan to understand, what does this reimbursement system look like? How much money do I need to have up front is going to be really important. Any questions on this, or any varieties that we haven't discussed that you're seeing in your community supports contracts? All right. So the next slide here, my conversation questions. We'll see if we get folks to jump in here. As I think about becoming a community supports providers, and I know a lot of you are still, thinking about becoming one, trying to figure out, does it match your organization's mission, all that good stuff. I wanted to just have some time to think about and discuss what the benefits are from your point of view of becoming a community supports provider. Does anybody want to be brave and talk about some of the benefits as they see it for becoming a community supports provider? Or if you're already doing these services, what benefits you've seen?
Hi, this is Manuel from Victor. We are not a community supports provider, and I'm here to see if we are interested. So I'm eager to hear from others. We are providing we're engaged in conversations about the other services, and this is one we're considering.
What's piqued your interest in community supports?
Well, it's aligned with our mission. It's different than what we currently do throughout the state, but it seems to be a helpful service to the community, and several of the communities we're in, we've been asked by stakeholders to consider it. So we're just thinking about it.
That's great. Anybody else have questions or have given some thought to the benefits to becoming a community supports provider, both to your organization, maybe to your community? It sounds like you've had some stakeholders encourage you to think about it. So I'm interested to see what other folks are experiencing.
Yeah, Gretchen, and to follow up on and add to that question, number one, thank you, Manuel, for providing that feedback. I think that's critically important to, framing this conversation, right? Like, you are considering whether or not to be a community supports provider, and this content can help to inform that decision. And so I, also wanted to ask, that same question to the other, participants that are on the call right now. Something that we took away from the prior phase of work was that having a smaller, more intimate setting, just as this one, only inviting a certain number of CBOs would be able to, foster, like this bidirectional communication and, serve to better inform the content that we are putting into these, to these presentations. And so, Manuel, I wanted to ask you, is the information that you received today, is this something that is, fresh to you? Is this something that the plans have already, or that you've already reviewed with the plans? Is this content on par, with being able to successfully help you inform that decision? Obviously, at a very high level, since this is the first of 3 sessions, but I would love to pose those questions to you and also invite the rest of the audience to answer the same. Is this content doing its job of helping you to inform that decision and move you along in contracting if, this content does encourage you to have a yes out of that, because of those benefits that, you just mentioned? And I would also like to pose that to anyone else as well.
Yeah, it's reassuring that it's consistent with, I've gone to other presentations for care coordination and it's consistent. So I kind of appreciate that. I would have been disappointed if you guys are doing it completely different than the other services, because then there goes that alignment we're striving for, right? And so it's consistent. So that reassures that if we do choose to do it, if we're doing the other services, we'll have a similar kind of process. Obviously, you have different kind of contracts with whoever you set up with, but that would make it for an agency like us that are statewide simpler, because all the services would have some kind of alignment. So I think from that perspective, it was helpful today.
I really, really appreciate that feedback. And so, once again, just to make sure that we're receiving the feedback that we need to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the participants that are in, that provide services in these counties. I just wanted to pose the same question, to our other participants, particularly those that, are not yet contracted or are trying to seek another contract with another plan. I'm just going to call it a few names right now. I see a Janet, Ashton, Lynn, let's see here, a Kent. Is this, informative to helping you make that decision? Whether it's a yes or a no, right? With regards to whether or not your organization wants to move forward with providing those CS services. We'd love to hear that feedback, as to the reasoning why as well, so that way we can take that feedback into consideration, as we share this information with other community-based organizations as well. And so, yeah, just definitely welcoming that feedback, because once again, as I, highlighted, as Gretchen highlighted, we want to make sure that we're providing the information that you need to make a well-informed decision. And if you have made that decision to move forward in this contracting process, what is it that you need to know? And is this content on par, with those expectations? And so, once again, definitely welcoming, our participants to dive into that dialogue to help us, support you. And I see that we do have a very, very quiet audience today. Very quiet. But it's okay, because we are also going to provide a survey. I see Kent has his hand up. Feel more than free to unmute. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm trying to follow the etiquette, Alexis. Chronically, you call my name, so I'll respond. This is something we've looked at. This really is a stretch for us to do these services. We really don't provide a lot of these, not that we couldn't, but we've kind of taken the approach of thinking if there's agencies that do this and have done it for a while, it might be better for them to do that. So this isn't something we're really focused on. I think your presentation is still very helpful, because even if we're not going to be a direct provider of such services, we'll interface with agencies that are. So understanding, again, what these are and how they support the client and family in their mental health treatment is important. What we are looking more at is the ECM and trying to understand that component, and thinking that might be a better fit for us organizationally. And also wanting to understand how the counties are approaching this. So Sacramento County, for example, is the first county that we work with that has added ECM as a service in our contracts. And we're figuring out what that means and how to provide it. So as much as we're looking at the MCPs, we're trying to understand what the counties are doing, as well as the MCOs, I should say, as well, in managing this.
Thank you so much, Kent. And before I ask Gretchen to also dive in with her feedback, I have just 2 points that I think are really important. Number one, we've heard a little bit of feedback from some of the other CBOs that they would like to receive content on, how to enhance coordination between ECM and CS providers. And so it sounds like that might be something that could potentially be of potential to you, even if you are not that CS provider, but that coordination piece, right?
No.
So that's really good to hear. And then number 2, I wanted to ask, if there are any counties on the line that can provide any feedback on, how they are working with CBOs. I'll pose that question before I hand it back over to Gretchen for any additional feedback or, solicitation of questioning that she might have as well. Do we have any counties that are on the line right now? Sorry, I don't have my registration list open in front of me, everyone. And looking through the names, we might strictly have CBOs today. But no, Kent, that information is incredibly important for us to hear. So I really appreciate that feedback. And yeah, Gretchen, thank you. I'll pass it back over.
This is all great to hear, and I know there's a lot of information out there and a lot of challenges to doing this work and changing how we contract, how we get paid from what we're currently used to. So I know it's a big change and a big decision. Are there questions that you guys still have about becoming a community supports provider that we can address today or incorporate into future sessions? I would love to figure out what you're still trying to figure out and what's on your mind still.
And at the same time, everyone's processing any final questions that they may have. We do have an additional needs survey that we want to post in the chat before we move on to our next steps. And I'll go ahead and post that right now for everyone, because in addition to receiving feedback on the curriculum itself, we just want to know, is there anything else that we haven't considered? Is there something that is very important that these sessions need to touch base on? Is there information that needs to be communicated to the plans, that needs to be uplifted? And so we've even received, as I mentioned in our session for Kings and Tulare last week, concerns or feedback regarding implementation. And if there are things that we can uplift, about the guidance or, about any of the curriculum points that we've shared with you via email that could better explain, what those, concerns could be, we'd love to know that. So, just like we mentioned, if you are a contracted provider, that's also fantastic for us to receive your feedback as well with some of the pain points that you may have experienced. Or uplift those best practices that we can share back with CBOs that are still considering, providing those community supports. And so I've gone ahead and posted that in the chat for everyone. It is literally a 60-second survey just for us to assess those additional needs. And yeah, sorry, Gretchen, once again, turning it back over to you for, any final
That's great.
Yeah, for those CBOs to uplift any best practices that they want to share with our other participants.
Yeah, I really like what we've learned so far about the importance of communicating with managed care plans and making sure that you're engaging in conversation. And I think it was Graciela who mentioned that things are changing at the state level frequently as well. So I think having that ongoing communication, checking for updates to make sure you have current information is really important. And I think there's a lot of expertise. I'm sorry, my dog is now told that it's time to bark, forgive me. There's a lot of expertise out there, and I think making sure you can share best practices with your colleagues and in your network is going to be really important. Let's jump to the next slide if we can, Alexis. So these are the two contacts for the managed care plans for all of you. Cynthia Pena from the Health Plan of San Joaquin, and there's a way to contact her through their website. And then Nye Kasich, who's going to be one of your contacts here for HealthNet. So feel free to reach out to folks, ask for questions. They're really eager to engage all of you and help you become community supports providers. So reach out to them. They're a really great resource. Next slide, please. This is our last poll. We've done a lot of polls today, but we do want to make sure that we understand what your needs are and how we can support you with it. So we would like to ask that you select the top 3 curriculum choices that meet your contracting readiness needs that we can start to develop for the next session for this effort. So why don't we go ahead and start the clock and the music if we have it for you guys to fill this out so we can customize our curriculum for what your needs are.
Yeah, and Gretchen, I'm so sorry. I'm actually having just a technical issue with launching the poll. So I'm just going to ask everyone, if they could just go ahead and look at what's on the screen right now and just, put a quick reference in the chat for us, with regard to the curriculum choices that, you would want to see us uplift in the upcoming sessions. And so I'll just read through them briefly so that way, you can know what your options are to put into the chat for us. And so it can be identifying and connecting with CBOs to nonprofit intermediaries. Just as we discussed previously, not all CBOs are going to want to direct contract with an MCP. So do you want to learn more about those intermediaries and those hubs? If that's the case, put that in the chat for us. Opportunities to braid and blend funding is an item that we hear a lot of feedback on. Some of the CBOs want to learn more about path funding, IPP, other community foundations that can support capacity building amongst CBOs. One of the options is helping to understand and leverage, how to braid CalAIM related infrastructure funding NTA opportunities. Do you want to learn more about community supports services and populations of focus? Do you want us to provide more content identifying system barriers and policy barriers to delivery? Let's see, we have something that's very important, opportunities to improve health equity in Medi-Cal related services. For example, identifying equity interventions. Is that something that you'd want to hear about? And our last 4 options here pertain to payment models, rates, and systems for CS providers, plus billing and invoicing, local service model challenges, coordination requirements and challenges facing ECM and community supports providers, as we mentioned with Kit, promoting that coordination between those providers. And then finally, opportunities to improve, that coordination. And so those are the options that we have right here. And if everyone could just, put into the chat their top 3 items that they would want, those next 2 sessions to focus on, we'll be able to tailor the content to your specific request and also let everyone know which members of their teams need to be present. For example, if we are talking about funding, finance teams do need to be present, for those conversations. If it has to do with billing and invoicing, the individuals that are executing billing and invoicing and providing those claims should be present. So we want to make sure that the participants come from the departments within your organizations that are relevant to the material that's being covered. And so feel more than free to just go ahead and drop that information in the chat for us, and we'll make sure that we move forward with that. And then, sorry, Gretchen, finally, I think that we may have next steps. There we go, Gretchen, I'll pass it back over.
Great. So thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate you being here. A couple of things we'd like to just highlight. If you could fill out that additional needs survey that Alexis has sent out, that would be really helpful to us. We do want to customize our trainings and our TA sessions for you and what your needs and questions are. So the more info we get from you, the better we can make these sessions and help them meet your needs. We do have some other upcoming sessions that we're doing. One is a statewide session, which is open to all California providers. So there's a lot of great information coming out through that. You can register for that session here. And we do have more county sessions for just Stanislaus and San Joaquin. So we'll get those invitations out as well. If you have questions, feedback, thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. So please email us at the email on the website here. Thank you all again, really appreciate it. Thank you to the HealthBegins team. All the collaboration has been great. I really enjoy working with all of you, and I would love to hear from you guys now via email. If you have any questions, thoughts, it'd be great to hear from you.